Good evening. In this broadcast, the information program Time. Last night, the government of Russia, on the instructions of the president, addressed the participants of the unlawful armed groups on the territory of the Chechen Republic with a proposal that from 8 a.m. today until 8 o'clock the 12th of January, they should cease fire, withdraw from positions, combat technology, lay down their weapons, and release those persons seized during armed clashes. The government of Russia has guaranteed unimpeded passage for members of the unlawful armed groups who voluntarily lay down their weapons to the locations of their permanent residence and absolute compliance with the resolution of the State Duma on declaring amnesty for those individuals involved in illegal acts connected with the armed conflict in the Northern Caucasus. The government has given necessary instructions to the command of the federal forces on a ceasefire during that period as well. Boris Yeltsin and Viktor Chernomyrdin today discussed the situation in the Chechen Republic. As the press service of the president reports, the prime minister reported to the head of state on measures undertaken regarding the discussed pause in the combat operations. He told the president about the first contacts with the elders and representatives of the groups in the framework of the first phase of the dialogue process. The president and the head of state subjected to critical analysis the methods of adopting significant certain political decisions, it says in the statement. The president especially emphasized the need for a broader involvement of professionals and analysts on the level of developing a solution, and also the need for a preliminary calculation of financial consequences of the decisions adopted. Despite the announcement of the 48-hour truce in various parts of Grozny, today street clashes continued, ITR-TASS reports. Federal detachments occupy several key positions, however, yet it is early to say that they have established control over the entire city. 1 hour ago, our special correspondents reported from Grozny. Today in Grozny, it was significantly more quiet and calmer than yesterday. The promised 48-hour cessation of combat operations since 8 o'clock in the morning, to a degree, was being observed. From certain parts of the city, isolated machine gun and automatic fire sequences were heard, and the rare artillery outbursts. By midday, when Alexander Migunov and I managed to get to the central square in Grozny, artillery fire significantly accelerated. Not only machine guns were firing, but mortar installations. Some mortar shells fell into the upper levels of the destroyed presidential palace. In the building, in my view, there seems to be more people there, the so-called defenders of the city, than there were yesterday. Possibly they have decided to use the breathing time and come out from under their cover. Today, Russian forces again attempted to move toward the center of Grozny from the direction of the central marketplace, located 500 meters from the presidential palace. However, the attack was deflected, a correspondent of Interfax reports. According to him, in Grozny, the positions of the Chechen militia in the center of the city were subjected only to sporadic mortar attacks. The Chechen villages, Komsomolskaya and Al-Khazurovo, where the 7th of January a Russian paratrooper division was captured, was not hit from air by federal forces yet, although the term of the ultimatum given them expired today at noon. At the same time, residents who fled with fear from those villages are in no rush to return. According to informed sources, as ITR-TASS reported, Russian paratroopers are being kept either in Grozny or in Argun. And here is what foreign companies were told by one of the representatives of the leadership of the armed Dudaev forces. Although I know, but I will not tell you the complete number of military prisoners, but they are more than 2,000. 2,000. Yes. Jahar Dudaev has agreed with the conditions of the 48-hour truce proposed by the Russian government. This, a correspondent of RIA News was told by the personal Dudaev representative, Shari Yusupov. According to him, Dudaev has no telephone contact from Grozny to Moscow, and he also avoids radio contact because of the fear his location will be determined. The text of the Dudaev response, as his representative said, was conveyed to Moscow along an indirect channel. Dudaev Chichnya proposed that the truce agreement be supplemented with several points. He offers to open corridors for the delivery of food and other humanitarian aid to the peaceful population, and also to deblockade the surrounded Russian and Chechen detachments. The Commissioner on Human Rights of the Russian Federation, Sergei Kovalov, expressed extreme bewilderment over the address of the government to the participants of the illegal armed groups on the territory of Chechnya, and announced his non-involvement in that document. In the statement of Sergei Kovalov received by Interfax this morning, it's emphasized that the content of the address is completely different than the agreement on the beginning of developing conditions for a temporary ceasefire in Grozny achieved by him the 9th of December during telephone conversations with the Prime Minister, Viktor Chernomyrdin, and the representative of the command of the Russian army in Chechnya. This morning, Sergei Kovalov flew from Nazran to Grozny. Material aid in the amount of 1.5 billion rubles will be issued to the family of the head of the operational staff of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia in Chechnya, the Major General Viktor Vorobyov, who on January 7th died in Grozny. The allocation of the amount is provided for by instructions of the Chairman of the State Duma. The Prosecutor of the Republic has opened a criminal case against the organizers and the active participants of demonstrations and other illegal actions during the last few days. This directly concerns those who turned the rally of the 7th of January in Makhachkala into an anti-constitutional action. It was declared as a peacemaking action. There was to be discussion of providing assistance to the refugees from Chechnya, who today are numbered at 30,000 in the Republic. But indeed, a demand was heard that Dagestan secede from the framework of Russia and join the Confederation of the Peoples of the Caucasus, which is assessed by the Prosecutor of the Republic as an appeal to forcefully change the constitutional structure. In the actions of the demonstrations organizers, war propaganda is also discerned, which is expressed in the admonitions to form volunteer regiments to deploy in Chechnya and the violations of citizens' equality on the basis of race, nationality, or religion. Apart from that, the radical elements dispersed lies on the presence in Dagestan of Russian troops, ostensibly using that territory of the Republic as its platform for combat operations in Chechnya. According to the assessments of specialists of the Federal Immigration Services of Russia, more than 38 billion rubles per month will be needed to receive, temporarily house, and support forced refugees from the Chechnya Republic. Currently, the number of resettlers has exceeded 130,000 people. Our special correspondent has returned today from Mozdok. This was filmed at dawn, or more precisely before dawn, when the convoy with humanitarian aid, escorted by the military convoy, left Mozdok in the direction of Grozny. And yesterday, in the Kamaz trucks, medications and foods were loaded. We were asked for information only upon the return of the convoy. The voyage was too treacherous. The convoy reached the position of our forces in Tolstoy Yurt and could not go on. The Kamaz trucks were getting stuck in the mud. Medications were given to doctors, food to the soldiers and refugees. On the return trip, people were brought back who left Grozny, and first of all the injured. You see them currently in the hospital of the medical catastrophes called Zashita, or defense, citizens with combat wounds, including extremely serious wounds. All night, surgery was performed, casts were placed, wounds were rewrapped. Physicians and nurses shared what they had, bread, tea, and gave away their own clothing. You've only seen one episode, but this, and it's terrible to say, is daily life here. The Ministry of Emergency Situation convoys with humanitarian cargo go to Chechnya almost daily. Along the line of the Ministry of Emergency Situations to Mozdok, 2,246 tons of cargo has been delivered, 26 tons of medications. Almost 800 tons already have left for their destination. The chairmen of the Federative Council of the State Duma, Vladimir Shumeka and Ivan Rybkin, by presidential decree today, were included as permanent members of the Security Council of Russia. Hence, the head of state made a change to the position of this organ, which was requested of him in a letter sent the 5th of January by the chairman of the chambers of parliament themselves. In May of 1994, the heads of both chambers were included in the Security Council as members, but according to the rules of this governing structure, then they had no right to vote at the conferences, since decisions of the council are made by its permanent members. Today's decree provides Vladimir Shumeka and Ivan Rybkin the right to a deciding vote. The deputy chairman of the Federative Council, Ramazan Abdullah Tipo, Kovalov today at a press conference in Moscow stated that, together with a forceful resolution of the Chechen problem, active dialogue must be pursued. If this does not occur, then tomorrow there will be no one left in Chechnya to speak with about restoring constitutional order on that territory, said Ramazan Abdullah-Tupov. I think that no interethnic conflict exists on a large scale. There is a purely political conflict along the vertical line when organs of power, official or unofficial, of one of the subjects cannot and could not get along with the federal organs of rule. The Vice Speaker of the higher chamber feels that Russians, for now, have managed to escape the sting of chauvinism toward Chechens, but the border is very frail here and it must be preserved. We have begun to view the Chechen Republic and the Chechen people through the aim of automatic weapons targeted at Dudayev. And I felt that the Chechen people are far richer and more dignified, and therefore we must conduct talks with everyone. Today in the Duma, the last preparations were underway for a special session. Factions were clarifying their positions, and discussions continued at the Duma Council meeting, where an agenda was adopted. The session will be fully dedicated to Chechnya. The deputies must discuss many documents. Among them is the law to forbid combat operations by Russian forces on Russian territory, a publishing of a list of military servicemen who have been injured, died, or missing in action. Also on the agenda is a question about observing human rights in Chechnya, and Sergei Kovalov, who will not come to the session, yet send his proposals also, and the deputies will examine them tomorrow. Apart from that, the parliamentarians will discuss the amendment to the constitution proposed by Russia's choice. If the Duma supports the faction's initiative, the deputies will be able to control the actions of executive government. Especially for the program time, this topic was commented on by the chairman of the Duma, Ivan Rybkin. This is not a new issue. It's debated actively in the parliament in Russia and also the parliaments of the entire world about the interrelationship of the branches of government, their powers, their rights and obligations. In our country, this arises because of a difficult situation which has developed in the south of our country. It occurred back in 1991. Everything has a background history, and for everything eventually one must pay in life. For rashness, for carelessness, including that on the part of the rulers, ruling thoughtlessness on the federal level, on the level of government. Today, the faction, Russia's Choice, announced its intention to include in the agenda of the special session of the State Duma 4 points. The first, to create a parliamentary commission to investigate questions important for the public, and notices to the commissions and providing of documents must be compulsory. The second point includes a draft law on publication of lists of injured or killed military servicemen. Russia's Choice plans also to submit for the deputies' discussion draft laws to forbid deployment of the army for combat on the territory of Russia, and not to permit budgetary or other financing for combat actions in the first quarter of the current year. The process of disarming the illegal armed groups within Chechnya must continue after the expiry of the 48-hour truce. This was announced by Moscow and stated by the Secretary of the Security Council, Ilya Kulobov. We have exclusive material which was prepared by correspondents of our television agency and the state television company Kuban, Dmitry Kochetkov, Vladimir Runov, and Yuri Arkhangelsky. The quantities of firearms in Chechnya are enormous, feels the Vice Premier of Russia, Nikolai Yegorov. In the Republic, weapons, stockpiles, and ammunition exist, and to annihilate them, Yegorov says, one may deploy aviation without restriction and reactive artillery. The Vice Premier feels that if now the forces had not been deployed in Chechnya, by summer Russia would have had a war engulfing all of Russia. Then, of course, there would not have been tens, but tens of thousands of casualties. Because a million-strong population, which has absolutely no economy and is enormously saturated with weapons. Yesterday, in the document, Shaposhnikov, the former Minister of Defense of the USSR, in so touching a manner, related how he did not participate in the transfer of weapons, but this was documentally confirmed when he was the head commander of the armed forces of the CIS countries. And here is his letter, dated the 18th of April, 1992, where he asks to convey to Dudayev military property and weapons for an adequate price. And here's the agreement. Lieutenant General Stroganov signed it, and Dudayev signed it. Here, indicated is the quantity of weapons transferred. Of course, all of this tomorrow would shoot throughout the Caucasus and through the south of Russia, and all of Russia would have been dragged into the conflict. Nikolai Yegorov feels that the Chechen crisis has showed that fundamental reform of the state-armed forces is necessary, so that in such conflicts, not children should be involved, young children, but professionals who have dedicated their lives to this. And one more necessary reform, in the opinion of the Vice Premier, a reform of mass media. Because today, all the sources of mass media have turned out to be in the hands of those who have their own interests in Grozny. Because the words freedom and liberty, this is all a cover-up. The real war is for the oil, which is concentrated there. Sources of mass media, in essence, have declared war against our statehood, have declared war against the government and the president. Of course, that soldier who was in the dugout and who was an eyewitness of all the barbarism, he will not be shown on the screens. On the screens you'll see Pamphilov, you'll see Gaidar, and on the screen you'll see Kovalyov, because they don't risk anything. They earn political dividends. They don't risk either with their families or children. Yes, but we do risk. Because any of us can imagine what would happen to his children if they're seized by those who swore revenge. We all understand everything. We have been condemned. But the same will happen with our families. And you see, they're now pretending to be do-gooders and very noble people. And it's reported that their children have died in Chechnya, but the media does not report that. A mercenary entered one of the nurseries, raped all the children and the instructors. Today, we can't show that woman who told us about this, the instructor from the nursery. We can't put her in front of the television camera because she's afraid. Naturally, she fears for the lives of her children and her own, so as to face a television camera and speak of those horrors which are done there. You understand that here, today, the fate of Russia is being decided. And today, if we do not withstand, in a few months, Russia won't exist. Viktor Chernomyrdin, during today's meeting with the representatives of the Chechen diaspora in Moscow, laid out a plan to regularize the conflict. 1 month of combat has brought both sides to the senses to seek any peaceful means out of the crisis. The Chechen diaspora in Moscow, with the mediation of Arkady Volsky, today met with the Prime Minister. Evidently, for the Premier, this visit was indispensable as well, especially since the President has appointed him to organize the dialogue process. Viktor Chernomyrdin, expressing grief and compassion, suggested to immediately deal with proposals, briefly listing his own. The disarmament and simultaneous amnesty for the armed formations, to restore organs of rule, form a government for the transitional period. However, the Chechen authorities, and among them were actors, doctors, scientists, and naturally Mahmoud Asanbayev, had to speak out. They reproached Moscow that humanitarian aid does not reach the warring republic, that the center should show respect for that people, and even promise that Russia will not interfere in the traditions, religion, and way of life there. And the government must buy out weapons because the Chechens, rather than buying bread, bought the weapons with their own money. In the opinion of Moscow authorities, the scenario with relinquishing weapons should go as follows. After declaring a truce, it will be relinquished first to the elders on the second level, to the elders and authorities on the third, into the hands of the organs of security in Chechnya. The Chechen diaspora also fears that in the event Grozny is taken, Russian troops will deal blows to the villages where naturally the armed groups will flee. What regards the new government, the people must choose. As a result of the meeting, the Moscow and Chechen delegations agreed that it's necessary to restore the legally elected former Supreme Soviet as the acting organ for the transitional period. Simultaneously, they accepted the assurance of Viktor Chernomyrdin that if the armed formations will not use weapons in the villages, federal forces will stop all combat operations. Today, we received information about the fact that the Interregional Coordinational Council of the Union of Workers of Television feels the plan of the reorganization of the Pan-Russian State Television Radio Company is impermissible, with the ensuing reduction of many journalists of Russian television and the dismissal of the head of the company, Oleg Poptsov. Many employees of the Russian television and radio do not exclude the possibility of a strike in the event that such a decree is signed. The union sent the President of Russia an appeal with a request to refrain from a rash decision. Today in Moscow, Oleg Poptsov held a press conference. The interest of journalists in the future of Russian television radio company was so great that the conference hall barely contained all those wishing to attend. However, the chairman of the Russian television radio company preferred not to speak of his dismissal, which documentally was not confirmed, but the reasons which precipitated the unannounced decree. In the opinion of Oleg Poptsov, Russian television, since it was founded, has remained faithful to the declared principle of open policy, which generated dissatisfaction of a certain part of currently ruling structures. Our government is set up in such a way, that's our Bolshevism, that it has to know and must know what we must watch, what we must hear, what we must read, and what we must watch. And it's very difficult to break that habit. In counterbalance to this tendency, dominating the participation of the president's circle and the government, Oleg Poptsov feels that state does not mean the television of government control, but it means the television of the public. The objective of a national company is to give a spectrum of points of view and force the public to look at those processes from various points of view and force the government to look as if in a mirror at those points of view and make its conclusions. Oleg Poptsov feels criticism of his company is ludicrous for reporting on the Chechen events, in no way justifying the Dudayev regime, the Russian television radio company, yet feels it's necessary to give all points of view on that problem, and not the decisions of the higher rule of the country are judged, but the forms and methods of realization. If this happens to be a police operation, it should be resolved by police forces and prove your professionalism. Don't torture your people. That is the issue. In the appeal to Boris Yeltsin, the staff of the Russian television radio company asked the president to consider the opinion of the labor collective of the Russian television radio company and not remove Oleg Poptsov from his post. No consultations were held with the chairman of the Federal Service of Russia on Television and Radio Broadcasting, Alexander Yakovlev, regarding the removal of Oleg Poptsov were held. Interfax was told this by the aide of Alexander Yakovlev today. The latter never met on this account either with the President of Russia or with Oleg Poptsov and learned of the decree from sources of mass media. Concern regarding the infringement of rights of journalists fulfilling their professional duties in the area of the Chechen conflict was expressed by the International Confederation of Journalist Unions. In the document signed by the chairman of the Confederation, Eduard Sagalayev, it says that all of this contradicts international norms defining the legal status of correspondents and also the principles of their work in conflict zones. The UN Secretary-General, Vili Klaas, called on the Russian leadership to, as soon as possible, put an end to the violence in Chechnya and facilitate the peaceful regularization of the conflict. According to him, this will permit to continue the process of political and economic reforms having key significance for the future of Russia. The Political Commission of the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council, at its meeting in Paris today, decided to temporarily suspend preparations of the membership of Russia in the European Council. The reasons which evoked this step were dramatic events in Chechnya, which were to be discussed and summarized. The Political Commission, whose session was closed for the press today, advised the session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council. It will be held the 30th of January. After lively debates, it was recommended to yet accredit the Russian delegation as a special guest at the coming session, against which part of the participants of today's session spoke out. Long and thorny is the path of Russia into this prestigious European organization. When it had seemed that all barriers were removed, all necessary conditions fulfilled, and for May its full entry into the European Council was planned, the Chechen crisis can, for an indefinite period, foil plans for European integration of Russia. Yet hope remains, and hope depends on how successful the actions of the Parliament, the President, and the government will be on resolving and stabilizing the situation in Chechnya, and how successful the preparations of our announcement will be for the Russian delegation in the meeting of the Commission. At the session of the government in Bonn, the Federal Chancellor of Germany refuted the recently discussed idea of implementing economic sanctions against Russia because of the use of military force in Chechnya. One must not create the impression that the West ostensibly is interested in the collapse of Russia, says Helmut Kohl, emphasizing that to preserve the wholeness of the Russian Federation has great significance for the stability of Europe, first of all for Germany. Apart from that, the Chancellor feels that one must not forget the fact that Russia is a great superpower and, as previously, has significant military potential. Events in the Caucasus are an internal matter of Russia, but battles in Grozny are ludicrous. This is full insanity, says the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Kinkel, exhorting Boris Yeltsin today to stop military operations in the Caucasus. The head of the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs expressed a suggestion to provide an autonomy status to Chechnya and invite all conflict sides to the dialogue tables. The military minister, Volker Ruhr, also rejecting economic sanctions against Russia, stated today that the Kremlin has violated many international obligations. One must not cover this up, and it will damage only Russia itself. And Ruhr also expresses the fear over the development of the internal political situation in our country and the abnormality of a situation when the military refused to carry out President's orders to stop bombing Grozny. Today, the German Red Cross sent the first convoy with humanitarian aid to Chechnya for the peaceful population of the Chechnya Republic at a value of 250,000 marks. Our personal correspondent in London, Alexander Malikov, unexpectedly fell out of favor with the British authorities. It was suggested that he leave the country within 1 month, and if he refuses, they threaten to deport him. It's also asserted that the journalist is an employee of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia. Meanwhile, he hasn't nor ever had anything to do with the Service of Foreign Intelligence. A correspondent of Vitortas was told by the press secretary of the director of the Federal Intelligence Service, Tatiana Samuelis, who also expressed bewilderment over the motives to expel Alexander Malikov. This news literally shocked us on the staff, who for more than 20 years watched Alexander Malikov work. The first thought was, what for? The ridiculousness of such accusations sustains no criticism. Who can assert with full confidence that our London correspondent works only for the news and was never involved in the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia? We know he's professional and honestly fulfills his duty as a journalist. We can't understand the reasoning of national security and the welfare of the public. This phrase belonging to the Minister of Internal Affairs of Great Britain regarding Alexander Malikov's presence there evokes no less bewilderment. There's an impression that they're speaking of someone else and not our correspondent. What precipitated this, one can only guess. And neither our correspondent or his attorneys were provided with clarifications from the British side. Evidently, it's espionage mania which swept Britain in the last months, and it began with the Gordievsky list, which I'll remind you at one time was the resident of the Soviet intelligence there. But we ask, what relation to this 10-year-old story does Alexander Malikov have? And so our correspondent, of course, if this is the last word of British authorities, will have to leave the island. And it's not the fact that we risk being left without an experienced reporter in England and won't see Big Ben and other English landmarks anymore. There's another concern. That is that our common interests are now the victims of a new tendency of the era of the Cold War, which in this case have taken the upper hand in the contemporary British society. With complete respect for the significance of those problems being resolved by the involved special services of Great Britain, yet we, however, with perplexity are forced to state that in this case, evidently, a tragic mistake is being made. A criminal attack on the Russian scientific research ship, the Professor Bogorov, was made in the territorial waters of Vietnam. According to Vitortas, the attack of sea pirates on the ship occurred on the night of the 9th of January near the port Cam Ranh. The local patrol ocean faring safety services of the Far Eastern shipyards reported that from the scientific research ship Professor Bogorov, an alarming radiogram was received. It was reported that the ship, on a scientific voyage in the waters of northern Vietnam, was attacked by pirates. They approached the ship on quickly moving schooners and managed to climb up on the deck. The group was armed only with knives, and they had no firearms in their possession, and therefore they presented no great threat to the crew. And according to the report, they quickly understood that on the usual scientific ship there would be no big gain. The pirates just as quickly left the deck of the Professor Bogorov, not harming the sailors in any way, although they grabbed along with them as loot around 100 meters of cable line. The ship continues its voyage. The heads of the general staffs of the Government Army of Angola and the armed groups of the opposition organization UNITA have agreed today to stop combat on the entire territory of the country. Officially, the government government of Angola and UNITA had signed a truce agreement back in November of last year. However, to date, combat in the south of the country had continued. New Year's holidays are behind us, and the holiday sale in South Africa is in full swing. The stores are attempting to squeeze out of their customers the last rands and dollars left after the country's record Christmas and New Year's sales. The sales by 15% exceeded expenditures for holiday gifts 1 year ago. This is a type of a dividend for the peace in South Africa after the non-racial general elections in 1994. And what helps is the operation of New Year, as well, of the security forces of South Africa. Police and soldiers conducted many arrests of criminals and confiscated mounds of illegal weapons. As a result, in the capital, Pretoria, in the center of the city, the level of crime has fallen by almost half, and owners of many jewelry stores here have breathed a sigh of relief. Their goods are delicate and require special protection and safekeeping, especially since the diamond smoke of the hot holiday sales has not dissipated yet. But it has marvelous jewelers, and there seems to be not a single woman who doesn't understand that diamonds add sparkle to any feminine beauty. But it's not enough to understand. One yet has to convince one's husband or friends of this valuable, sometimes greatly valuable thought. And judging by the record sales of diamonds these holidays in the south of Africa, this process of feminine suggestion and seduction is developing very successfully. Today, the official visit of the President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, to Georgia ended, during which a package of documents was signed: the Declaration on Perspectives of Developing Cooperation between Ukraine and Georgia and Common Approaches in Issues of International Relations, the Protocol of Developing Trade and Economic Cooperation between the two countries in the year 1995, and also several intergovernmental agreements. At the press conference, Leonid Kuchma and Edvard Shevardnadze gave a very high assessment to the results of the first visit of the President of independent Ukraine to independent Georgia, again emphasizing the need to coordinate efforts in the aim of developing mutually beneficial, equitable cooperation of CIS countries, mostly in economic sphere. Today, the rate of the ruble against the American dollar in trading at the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange fell by 38 rubles compared to the Friday's session and was 3,705 rubles for 1 American dollar. A new step in resolving the problem of providing the capital with food was made by city authorities today. The mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, and the head of the administration of Krasnodar Rim, Evgeny Kharitonov, signed an agreement providing the renewal of close economic ties. Evgeny Kharitonov stated that Kuban is a steady supplier of foods to the capital. The sides had agreed on large shipments of meat, eggs, fresh canned vegetables and fruit, sunflower oil, and the famous Kuban wheat, from which the Moscow bakeries can bake a very high-quality bread. However, the agreement is not reduced to a simple exchange of goods. It should create conditions for lucrative investment of Moscow's free financial means into the industry of Kuban. Yuri Lushkov emphasized that developing ties between the regions strengthens the economic and political unity of the country. The beginning of the new year is marked by the appearance on the political horizon of Russia of a new party. A report from St. Petersburg. In St. Petersburg, there are 28 registered public organizations and movements. In the names of many of them, the word democracy is present. During the last 10 years since Perestroika, the attitude to that term has changed. However, that doesn't mean that the ideal notions of freedom and justice have vanished. Simply, one must make them priorities in government policy. And this was emphasized at the organizational meeting of the Petersburg Regional Party of Social Democracy. We presume that above all should be the individual, and then the public, and then the government. To date, it was always the contrary. We today wish to clearly develop an ideology according to which we should lead the people. This ideology must be clear, accessible, and just. And heading all of the actions of our party, there must be 3 words. They are freedom, justice, and brotherhood. In a moment, with the sports news, Ilya Kukin awaits you, and with this I bid you farewell, goodbye. Good evening. Today in the International Hockey League tournament, there were 6 matches in the Eastern Zone. Here are the results. We'll note more victories of the leaders, the Lada from Taliati and the Magnitogorsk Metallurgist. Lada in Samara beat the Army Air Force team 5-1, and in Kazan, the Magnitogorsk team beat the Ruby team 6-1. Will the NHL season be or not be? Today at 20 hours Moscow time, the answer to this question was to be received finally, and almost 24 hours was spent behind closed doors by Gary Bettman and Bob Goodenow. But according to the Associated Press Agency, a final statement on the results of the talks again is delayed by several hours. At the tournament of the World Cup Alpine skiing competitions in the Austrian Flachau, the victory in the Supergiant was held by the host Renate Gotschel. She beat such a fearsome rival like the German Katze Zeitzinger. Overall in the World Cup among the women, ahead is Heidi Bechler from Switzerland. During these days, there are several international mini-soccer tournaments. In one of them, which is being held in Hamburg, the victory was held by the Moscow Spartak team. They took first place in their subdivision and later in the semifinals beat the Bulgarian Lavski 2-1, and in the final, the Swedish Norrköping 4-1. On the eve of the Australian Tennis Open, on the courts of the Green Continent, traditional tournaments are underway. In Sydney, beginning with a victory, was Andrei Medvedev against the American Richie Renneberg. In New Zealand's Auckland, the Russian Alexander Volkov won his first match, and only a few levels remain in the Super Marathon of Paris Grenada-Dakar. Details in the special report on the television channel Ostankino at 21:45, and I'll remind you that in the truck class, the first 2 spots in the overall count, as previously, are held by the KAMAZ teams. Good evening. Another Atlantic cyclone is expected tomorrow over the Gulf of Riga. It will bring unfavorable weather to the Kaliningrad district, the Baltic countries, and the northwestern region. Here it will be cloudy with some patches of snow turning into rain and strong gusty winds, temperatures around 0. It's cloudy with some precipitation expected in Karelia and the Murmansk-Arkhangels districts with day temperatures from -4 to 7. The Nenetsk Autonomous District and the Volga area in the zone of high atmospheric pressure will have mostly clear skies with temperatures from -6 to 11. The same temperature in the Republic of Komi, but here there's a possibility of brief snow. An atmospheric front moving from the west will bring to Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova cloudy weather with some snow and patches of wet snow with strong gusty winds, temperatures around 0 with icy road conditions. Under the influence of an atmospheric front in the central Chernozem area, winds will increase, cloud cover will thicken, precipitation is possible during the day, -1 to 6 degrees. On the central Volga, in the zone of high atmospheric pressure, it's mostly sunny with day temperatures -11 to 16. The Stavropolya and Krasnodar Rim area, the northern Caucasus republics, and the lower Volga under the influence of an atmospheric front. Therefore, here it will be cloudy with patches of wet snow and rain during the day in the Stavropol and Krasnodar Rim areas in northern Ossetia and Ingushetia and the Chechen Republic and in Dagestan, +1 to 5 degrees. On the lower Volga, around 0. In the mountains of the northern Caucasus, there's a danger of snowslides. On the Black Sea coast of the Caucasus, it's cloudy, rainy, but warm, +8 to 10 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, partly cloudy skies during the day, some light precipitation. In Georgia and Azerbaijan, +7 to 10. In Armenia, 0, +2. In St. Petersburg, cloudy with patches of precipitation, day temperature 0, +2. In the capital, cloudy with some light snow at night, -11 to 13. During the day, -5 to 7. Winds are southerly and the roads are icy. Be careful and attentive. Information compiled by the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. Goodbye.